Good morning, and thanks for hanging out with us on International Student Loan. Today we're going to talk about a popular subject, and that is the top 10 key terms that you need to know in order to apply for your student loan. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that I'll be answering all of your questions here live online, so make sure that you send in your questions. You can do that in the Google screen right there where you're looking at, or you can also send it to us through Facebook or Twitter. We will also be having a conversation at our #FinancialAidTalk, so please join the conversation after our presentation where we can engage on the subject and make sure we get all of your questions answered. So with that being said, let's get started. So when it comes to international student loans or even study abroad loans, now is the time that you should be thinking about it. It's a time where you're thinking about the cost of tuition, your books, health insurance, and all of the other fees that add up. And if you need help trying to cover those costs, then student loans can be a great way to do that. And what we're going to do is talk about these key terms so that way when you're comparing the different student loans side by side, you know which ones to look at, you know which ones will work better for you, and then you can start to apply for them right online. So with that, let's get started right away. The first student loan term, which is the most important one, is the cosigner. Your cosigner is the person who is basically guaranteeing your student loan. So they're the ones that's saying, if you can't pay back your student loan, they will instead. Now, when it comes to your cosigner, it's very important that you make sure that they are a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, that they have lived in the U.S. for the last 2 years, and that they have good credit. Now, that brings me to term number 2, and that is your credit score. And you may have heard this term before. But basically, what a credit score is it's the credit worthiness of either you or your cosigner. Now, keep in mind, if you're an international student, you will need to have a cosigner. If you're a U.S. student, it will help improve the likelihood of getting accepted and under better, favorable terms. So make sure that you know what your cosigner's credit score is. The credit score is essentially a number, it's a numerical value that identifies the financial responsibility of that person. So it takes into consideration all the financial history and gives them a number. And then the student loans will basically evaluate that number and then give you a price or cost of buying or borrowing that loan. And it's very, very important. Now, if you want to know what your credit score is or your cosigner wants to know what their credit history is, you can actually get access to that. There are 3 major companies to do that. It's Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. These 3 companies will allow you to get a free report every year, so you or your cosigner can go in and see what that is. Once you've found your cosigner and you're sure that they have good credit, then you're ready to start the application process. And that brings me to our next important key term, and that's origination fees. Origination fees are basically a cost to have the application. So when you apply for your student loan, you're going to you may or you may not have a fee associated with it. The good news is that with all of our student loans on our internationalstudentloan.com site, you can see all of the loans, you can apply for them as well, and there is no origination fees at all. So you can apply free of charge. Now, if you're going to be looking at other student loan options, make sure to review the terms, conditions, and contact your lender to make sure that there aren't any surprises along the way. Once you're ready to start the application, then you may see this term, which is the Social Security number. And if you are a U.S. citizen, you're probably very familiar with this term. If you're an international student, you may actually have seen this, or you may actually have one of your own. And basically, the Social Security number is a number that identifies you. You use this number when you apply for credit cards, you use it for student loans, you even use it when you're applying for your taxes. So it's a very, very important number. If you're an international student, you may or may not have one. If you're working in the U.S., you'll have one. If you're not, that's okay. When you apply for your student loans, there's going to be a field that's going to ask you for your Social Security number. If you don't have one, that's fine. It's not necessary for the majority of the lenders. If you're having any problems with the online application, you can always call the lender directly and let them know, and then they can sometimes send you the paper application. But for the majority of the loan applications, you actually don't need that. So when you get to that, you might be able to skip it, or you just have to let them know there's different applications depending on where you're from, so you would just indicate that on the application. Okay. The next important key term is disbursement. Okay, and the key word here is disperse. Disbursement is basically when you're going to get the money. The most important point, right? When you come to student loans, you want the money for that. And what disbursement does is basically it's when the lender gives the money to your school, who then disperses or gives you the money. Now, that's really important, especially if you're going to be studying abroad, because you don't want to be in Spain or Italy and find out that your money's back home. So make sure that you contact your school. Usually it's within the financial aid office, and they'll be able to tell you exactly when you're going to receive that money. Very, very important to know when that is, because that way it'll allow you to get the funds that you need to start budgeting right away and paying off those costs. Once you start taking back the loans and you got the money, then the next step you're going to want to know is what your deferment period is. Okay, and so think of the word defer. The deferment period is basically how long you have before you start making your payments back to your student loans. So it depends on the loan, it depends on the terms and conditions when that time period will be, and you'll have to weigh the pros and cons to both of those options. Sometimes with certain student loans, you start paying back those loans right away. There are others that you can defer as far as 6 months after you graduate. So it's really just going to depend on what you prefer. Now, obviously, we want to wait as long as we can to start paying back the loan, but there's a cost and there's a benefit to that as well. When it comes to your student loan, if you start paying back right away, then your fee is going to be lower. The cost of borrowing is going to be lower. Now, if you wait 4 years or even longer, 6 months after graduation to start paying back that student loan, keep in mind that even though you've had that period, the grace period where you haven't made those student loan payments, you're going to have to pay more. So make sure that you find out what that period is going to be and look at your wallet, look how much money you've got on hand, look at if you're taking a job right now while you're in school. All these are good, important factors to consider when you're going to receive money so that you can start paying back the loans. The next key term, number 7, is our repayment period. And number 6 and number 7 really work together. When it comes to the repayment period, again, the key word here is repay. So when you're going to start paying back your student loan. When it comes to your repayment period, it's going to depend on how long those payments continue until. So it could be 15 years, it could be longer. So it's basically you're making those monthly payments for how long. Now, again, same thing with the deferment period. When it comes to the repayment period, the longer you're making those payments, while the cost per month that you pay will be lower, the amount that you pay on top of the actual student loan amount will be higher. Now, if you have a shorter repayment period, you're going to have larger payments per month, but you're going to be paying less overall after the full loan is completed. So again, you're going to have to weigh your pros and your cons. What I also suggest is looking at what your job opportunities are, looking to see how much you're going to be making, so that way you make the smart decisions as you evaluate these issues and these different student loan options. Now this loan term interest rate is extremely important, and that's your cost of borrowing. Your cost of borrowing is expressed in an interest rate, expressed in a percentage. And what it's saying is the cost on top of how much you borrowed, how much you're going to pay in addition. Now there are 2 kinds of interest rates. There's the variable interest rates and there's the fixed interest rates. Variable interest rates fluctuate. And so that means that it's going to be tied to some sort of index. So it's basically a percentage that's going to vary. It could be by day. It could be longer than that. It's just going to depend on those terms. And then the fixed interest rate is basically a flat interest rate. So the good news with a fixed interest rate is that you know how much you're going to pay every month. With the variable interest rate, that can fluctuate. And that can be good or it could be bad. In some cases, if you have a fixed interest rate, you may be paying more or less than a variable interest rate. So make sure that you consider that. Would you rather know what you're going to be paying, or would you rather get a more favorable rate and take the risk if it's no longer as favorable as the fixed rate? Again, these are all important decisions, and when you're comparing your different student loan options, you'll want to evaluate this. And staying on the same terms as interest rate, there's a couple of terms within interest rate that you're going to want to know because you're going to see it on your student loan application. The first is APR, and you'll see this a lot. In fact, if you go to our site on International Student Loan and you click Apply Online and you see the list of lenders that will work for you and your school, you'll notice that it says APR. And what APR is, it's the annual percentage rate. and it's basically a nominal interest rate. So it's not the total cost that you're paying, but it's a good indicator as to how much you can expect to pay. And really what it does is allows you to compare your different student loan options. That number is a requirement for all private student loans in the U.S., so you'll be able to see what that number is and evaluate what those costs are. It's over a 1-year period usually, that's how they calculate it, but don't think that that's the only amount that you're going to pay because, again, it's nominal, so it's not adjusted for other factors such as inflation and things like that. But it does give you some insight into what you should expect to pay and also how to compare the different loans on nominal straight terms. Now, we talked a lot about the variable interest rate, and that's where the LIBOR is going to come in. And LIBOR, what that is it's an interest rate. It's published every single day by London banks, and it's the amount of, it's basically the percentage that banks borrow from each other. And so while the rate itself doesn't really matter, your variable interest rate will be somewhat set to that rate depending on the student loan that you go with. So every day at 11 o'clock on a business day, they publish those interest rates. And so again, that's just another term for an interest rate that basically is with the market. So those are just some overviews on key interest rates and key student loan terms that you're going to see when you do the application. Now's the time to start thinking about it. Student loans, if you apply now in the next couple of months, then you'll be able to get your student loan by the beginning of the semester in August or September, depending on when your school starts. So start thinking about these terms. It's very, very important that you understand them so that way you can have a successful education and that you're financially smart as well. So with that, please send in your questions right now. I'm going to take some of your questions live on air. If we don't get to them, I will be answering them on our social media, Facebook pages, Twitter pages, Google+. So please send them in. Again, you can join our conversation at Financial Aid Talk, so join the conversation there. So let's start and get to your first question. And the first question is from Prasad. And it is, I am an international student looking for student loan options. Where can I start? And that's an excellent question. You know, there are a lot of student loans out there, and whether you're a U.S. student or you're an international student, you're going to have to evaluate your student loan options, and it might not be so crystal clear. Because what happens is your school certifies the loan, so your lender has to work with your school in order for you to even be eligible for your student loans. So if you go onto our site, internationalstudentloan.com, you click on Apply Online, you'll actually be able to compare your student loan options right there. And again, you'll see a lot of these terms, and now that you know what they are, you'll be able to evaluate which options are right for you, and you can actually apply right from there. So that's a great place to start and look and evaluate your terms and conditions to see what's right for you. We have our next question from Get2. I'm an international student. What is the difference between a student loan and scholarship? And how can I get it? Great question, a very, very important question because there's a huge difference between scholarships and loans. Scholarships are basically aid that's given to students that you don't have to pay back. It's always great to really maximize your scholarships because, again, it's basically free money. You don't have to worry about, at the very end, paying back plus a cost because someone's giving it to you. Keep in mind, though, those scholarships can be competitive. There is a number of places that you can look. You can ask your school. There's a lot of private scholarships out there for you as well. If you go to IEFA, again, that's IEFA.org, you can search scholarships and see which ones are right for you. It's a great place to do that. And then keep in mind, though, if you've maximized your scholarships, you might still have a gap where you can't afford your costs. And if that's the case, that's really when student loans should come into play. The reason for that is because student loans require you to pay back the money that you've borrowed plus a cost to actually borrow that money. So you always want to look and maximize your scholarships, your grants, and then if you still have money left over, then you can look towards loans to help you cover those fees. Our next question comes from Jack. And his question is, I apologize for this question, might sound personal, but I live outside the U.S. and my wife lives and works in Montreal, Canada. Do you think she can be a cosigner? Thanks. Great question. And again, we get a lot of questions about cosigner because for a lot of international students especially, it's very, very hard to find a U.S. cosigner. All of the U.S. student loans, all of the U.S. private student loans do require that you have a U.S. cosigner. So even if she is in Montreal and she's Canadian, it will not work. It has to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Now keep in mind also, they have to have lived in the U.S. for the last 2 years. So even if you have a cosigner who is a U.S. citizen living in Montreal, if your wife is, let's say, a U.S. citizen living in Canada, she will have had to live in the U.S. for 2 years in order to be eligible to cosign your loan. Again, we get a lot of questions on it. You can find more information about how to find a cosigner on our resources page of International Student Loan. We've got some videos and ways that you can approach people to ask them to cosign your loan. Keep in mind, though, it's a huge undertaking for someone to basically say they're going to pay back thousands of dollars for you. So be prepared when you ask. Ask your friends, ask your family members. You really want to engage with them to see what options exist for you. If you don't have a U.S. cosigner, unfortunately, the student loans will not work for you. So it's very, very important that you look and evaluate your options. With that, let's move on to our next question, which is from Muzau. His question is, please, I need a loan to pay for my online distance learning PhD information technology at UGSM Monarch Business School, Switzerland. Great question. Unfortunately, distance learning does not qualify for student loans. You have to physically be located overseas. So if you're going to be doing an online distance program, what I would recommend doing is calling them, asking them if they know of any options for you. They may have ideas because they work with other international students, but for online distance learning, usually you're back home, and so because of that, the financial aid is very restricted. Let's take our next question. It's from Muhammad. How can I be eligible for the loan? Is it allowed for a master's degree? And the answer is yes. You can be an undergraduate, you can be an associate's degree, or you can be going for your master's degree. Doesn't make a difference. As long as you are a part-time or full-time student, then you are eligible for the student loans. You do need to be attending an accredited university or college, and if you want to see the student loans that are available to you, you can go on to International Student Loan, click on Apply Online, choose your school, and then you'll be able to see right there the list of options that are available to you. Okay, we'll take our next question. It's from Aaron. Which institutions in Canada is offering scholarships or loans to international students studying in Canada? That's a great question. Again, scholarships, there are a lot of scholarships out there, and you just have to look. Like I had mentioned before, if you go to iefa.org, you'll be able to see a list of scholarships there. You can actually search where you're going to be studying. So you can put Canada there, and you'll be able to see the list of scholarships that are available. As for student loans, it's really just going to depend on your citizenship. U.S. student loans are only available to either international students coming to the U.S. or U.S. citizens going abroad. So if you're going to be a U.S. citizen going to Canada, that's fine if you're going to be studying abroad, so you're getting credit in your home university in the U.S., or if you're going to be receiving credit in Canada, you are eligible for our student loans. Again, you can go to our site, do the apply online, and you're going to see the list of lenders there. If you are from a different country, so you're not non-U.S. citizen or permanent resident, then the U.S. loans will not work. It does not work for non-U.S. students going to non-U.S. locations. So you may want to, again, ask your school and find out whether or not they know of any options. So definitely check that out. And again, if you're on there, if you have more questions, if I'm answering your questions and you have more questions that are coming up, send it to us through Google+. Again, you can join the conversation at #FinancialAidTalk. We're going to take another question here, and this question is from Bridget. Are there any lenders that do not require a U.S. cosigner? For these U.S. private student loans, they do require a U.S. cosigner. And like I mentioned before, it can be very, very tough to find someone who meets the requirements of being a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, having good credit, and having lived in the U.S. But it is critical in order to apply. So if you do not have someone who can co-sign your loan, unfortunately, these U.S. private student loans will not work for you. But you just need one. So if you talk to your friends, family members, ask them if they know of anybody who would be willing to do that for you, then you're set to go. Our next question comes from Stevie. Can students studying in China get a student loan? And the answer is yes. If you're a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident going to China, then you are eligible for our student loans. That's no problem. You just have to be either getting credit at your home university, and that that actual university in the U.S. has to be accredited and approved, or your Chinese university, if you're getting credit directly in China, they have to be accredited and affiliated. If you're not quite sure whether or not they are, you can go onto our site under eligible countries. You can look for China, and there'll be the list of countries there. Otherwise, you can even just use the apply online function, and you'll be able to see what lenders are available to you. All right, we're going to take our next question. This one's from Isam. How can I get a student loan? Great question. Applying for a student loan is pretty easy if you've got your U.S. cosigner. Basically, what you'll do is you'll go to the Apply Online page on International Student Loan. You'll put in your details. You'll see the list of lenders that will work for you. Choose the one that's right for you, and then the whole process can be done right online. You will need to get your information from your cosigner, so make sure to have that dialogue, get their personal information, such as their phone number, their email address, and their address, because they will need to fill out some information. Our next question comes again from Bridget. How long does it take before one knows if the student loan is approved? Good question, and that's really just going to depend. You can get a notification if you're pre-qualified within just a few days. The way the student loan process will work on the back end is basically once you submit your application, you'll get pre-qualified. They're going to review the information. That whole process before you actually receive the funds will take about 15 to 90 days, just depending on the process. Again, what happens is on your student loan, what the lender will do is verify the amount of money that you're taking out with your college or university. So it also depends on them as to when they actually make that approval. So make sure that you're in contact with them. Do it now. Do it in July and August. That's the best time to apply, because that'll make sure that you get that money before school starts. Okay. We've got another question from Sarah. How can I get one? I'm in the Philippines and I'm not from the U.S. I'm from Kenya. Great question. Again, if you're not from the U.S. though, and you're not going to a U.S. country, then unfortunately our U.S. private student loans will not work for you. You can look at scholarships, grants, and again, you can go onto IEFA.org and find that. Otherwise, what I'd recommend doing is contacting your school, seeing if they know of any financial aid that can help you. We've got another question from Bridget. When do you have to pay for a student loan once it's approved? And that goes back to our student loan term that we talked about, is your deferment period. So when is your deferment period? And that's just going to vary by your lender. So you may start paying back your student loan after the funds are given to you, or you may be able to delay it as late as 6 months after your graduation. So that's just going to depend. So make sure that you review the terms and conditions. If you have questions, contact your lender, ask them, because they'll be able to assist you, and that way you can figure out when you can really have the ability to start paying back those student loans. We've got another question from Joseph. Are there any restrictions to getting a student loan, i.e. being a U.S. citizen or attending certain programs? Also, when is the latest that I can pay for it? So when it comes to student loans, there is no U.S. citizen restriction, which is great news for all of you international students. You really can just apply as long as you've got a U.S. cosigner. So all you would need to do is just go on and apply for it. You're eligible if you're going to be enrolled in a U.S. institution, or if you're a U.S. citizen going abroad. There is no program requirement on that, which is great news. So you could be doing your master's, you could be doing your undergrad, your associates, and you are eligible for the loans. Now, keep in mind, though, your school does need to be accredited, and it has to have some sort of relationship with the lender. So if you're not quite sure which lenders you need to look at, you can go onto our site, apply online, and you'll be able to see those lists of lenders. We've already done the hard work on the back end for you, so we've taken that all into consideration so you can see the list of lenders there. Once you submit the application, again, you'll get paid the amount of money that you're applying for from your university with between 15 and 90 days. You want to contact your financial aid office, as they're the ones that determine when the money is actually paid out. But the good news is that you can apply year-round, so while now is a huge time for international students because the new semester is going to start soon, you can actually apply for each term or throughout the year. So there's no restriction on that. Then you'll get the money back from the lender, which is really given to you by your university. And then it's just a matter of your Again, deferment period. So how long are you deferring? So when do you start making those payments? So the payments can start right away. It can wait until 6 months after graduation or somewhere in between. Again, you want the lower, more affordable student loan. You want to start paying them back sooner rather than later. But again, that's just going to depend on your budget. That's going to depend on how much money you have on hand to start making those payments back. Okay. Our next question is from Mashid. And his question is, I'm not a U.S. citizen, and I do not have a cosigner. Is there any chance for me to get a student loan? And as I mentioned before, unfortunately, if you're not a U.S. citizen and you don't have a U.S. cosigner, then these private student loans through these U.S. lenders will not work with you. And the reason for that, just to kind of give you some more information about why, because I know a lot of you, it's hard to find that U.S. cosigner. It's basically because they're non-collateralized loans. So there's no house, there's no assets that you're putting up in case you can't repay. And because of that, the lenders are saying, well, we'll still give you the student loan, but you have to have someone tied to the U.S. that will be willing to guarantee it for you. So that's why, that's kind of the logic behind why you need to have a U.S. cosigner. It's very, very important. But again, you'll need to have that U.S. cosigner in order to start the application process. So before you even start preparing, you'll want to start asking that question to find someone. As I mentioned before, family members are a great place to start. You may have long-distance relatives. You may also have friends that may know somebody, or may just be friends who can co-sign your loan. But keep in mind, it's a huge undertaking for these people. So you need to be prepared. You need to have the numbers already calculated, a plan on how you're going to pay it back, because that way someone's going to be more likely to co-sign your student loan. Okay. So we've got our next question here from Emmanuel. Can I get a student loan without a cosigner? I have been admitted to a school in the U.S. for undergraduate studies, and I'm from Nigeria. Okay, great question. Again, going back to the cosigner, you have to have a cosigner in order to apply. Now, the good news is that you can actually apply once you're admitted to a school. So you're ready to start the application process, but you will need a cosigner in order to actually apply, because again, the U.S. lenders will need someone in the U.S. who will vouch for you, saying that they'll pay it back if you can't. The next question is from Mashid. If someone becomes my cosigner, does it make him/her limited to take other loans? How does this loan affect him/her? Great question, a really great question. And I think that you're really getting to the importance of the cosigner in this question. And basically, it's a huge undertaking because they're putting their credit score on the line. So they're saying that if that person can't pay, then they'll pay instead. So if they have other obligations, they have other debt, that really can affect their credit score. And when they run the numbers, when you've applied, the lender is going to look to see what kind of debt that person has and what their ability is to pay. So all of that's really going to impact your application, because at the end of the day, what happens is these lenders are going to look at your cosigner and the credit score of your cosigner and evaluate their ability to pay, the likelihood or the risk that you can't pay back your student loan. And that'll essentially come down to your interest rate. What that interest rate is going to be, which you won't get a final confirmation until after you've applied for the student loan, because it's going to be impacted by it. Let's say, for example, you can't pay back your student loan. This person is saying that they'll pay it back, and if they can't pay it back, then they're not only on the line for all the thousands of dollars that they may be co-signing, but it will affect their credit score. So it will affect their ability to get other loans and to take on other debt, and it may also impact their interest rate that they get. So it may become more risky in that case, and they can't get more favorable rates. And that's why it's so important that you come prepared, because someone co-signing your loan is a huge responsibility and will, at the end of the day, not only affect you, but could affect their financial future as well. We've got another question here from Isam. His question is, well, I've not applied for a student loan before. Is that a problem? And the answer is no. Even if you've applied for student loans before, you're still eligible. You can actually apply for student loans anytime you want, which is really important, especially as you think about this, because you only want to borrow the total cost that you need to in order to apply. Because again, remember that you're not only going to have to pay back the amount that you borrow, but you're going to have to pay back an extra interest rate on top of that, so an extra cost to borrow that money. So the smaller of a loan that you take, the less that you're actually going to pay out for that cost to borrow the money. So you want to be smart about that. You'll want to think that through so that way you can take out as much as you need. And then later on, if you need more money, you can always take out another student loan. But whether you've had a student loan in the past, whether you have a new one, doesn't affect your likelihood of getting approved. We've got another question here from Adil. I am starting a new semester this fall. Is it too late to apply for a loan? And does the International Student Loan website guide me to find loan sources? I already have a cosigner. Well, Adele, you've already dealt with the most important part, which is getting the cosigner. So good job, you're ready to start. In fact, the good news is you are not too late. You're actually asking the question at the perfect time. So you can start applying now in June. Best time really to start applying is in July and August. You can start applying now, and you will get the funds before the new semester. Just make sure that you get that information in now, that you apply for it now, so that way you're ready when that time comes, and that there's no delays. But again, you can apply year-round, so there's not a deadline for you. So make sure that you got all the information from your cosigner as well. Again, you want the contact details. So you want their full name, you want their email address, phone number, and also their address, because you'll put that into the application because they'll need to fill that out as well. If you go to our website on International Student Loan, you can go to apply online, fill it out. It's only 2 questions long. It should take you no more than 10 seconds, and then you'll get the list of lenders there that you can evaluate. So yes, we can definitely point you in the right direction, give you the information. That way you can make the decision that works best for you. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. You know, we're here to help you make sure you make the smart financial decisions. So send your questions to us at info@internationalstudentloan.com. Again, I'll say that again, info@internationalstudentloan.com. We have around-the-clock support for you, so that way you get all those answers questions, especially as we head into the busy season where we're going to have a lot of students applying. You can also use our social media channels. So you can go on Facebook and find us, Twitter, Google+, as we constantly are monitoring that. So send your questions in so that way we can make sure that you're ready and prepared when that time comes to apply. We've got another question here from Deuce. Please explain one more time, what's the difference between a scholarship and a student loan? And just to go over that again, a scholarship is basically free money. Okay, so you're getting money from an institution or from an organization that you don't have to pay back. Usually they're very competitive because who wouldn't want free money? And that's a great place to start if you need help funding your education, covering your tuition, your books, and other things like that. Student loans, that actually requires you to pay back the money plus a cost to borrow. So that's the main difference between the student loan, where you're going more through a bank, and a scholarship, which you can go through your university. There's a lot of home country aid as well. Your home country may have aid that will help you cover your expenses, or even private organizations like nonprofit organizations, companies that will sponsor students to go abroad, and basically give the money to help them cover the expenses, but do not expect to get paid back the money. So scholarships are definitely the first place to look, but sometimes that doesn't cover it all. So that's where the student loans come in. We've got another question from Mohammed. I would like to know the best sources to help me fund my international studies in the U.S. as an undergraduate student. Great question. And the way that I look at it first is you apply for your school and you're going to get a financial aid package. You may want to call them and ask them in advance and see what kind of scholarships or grants or fellowships they offer. Sometimes also students, especially U.S. students, but also some international students can have limited part-time work. So that may be another option, an avenue for you. Then you'll want to look at scholarships too, because again, that's free money that will just help you cover your expenses. And then at the very end, then if you have anything left over, then you want to look towards loans to help cover that. Okay, so that's basically the process. I think about it more like a pyramid. So you really want to make sure that you have the most amount is your scholarships, and then any work that you can do, you can contact your international student advisor or your U.S. advisor if you're a U.S. student to see what options exist. And then fellowships, grants, that all kind of goes into that same level. And at the very end, anything left over is student loans. All right, so at this point, I think we've answered the majority of your questions. So I hope that you found this helpful. I hope that you feel more prepared and ready to start applying. If you go on to internationalstudentloan.com, click Apply Online, again, you can see the list of lenders there. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please send it our way. We're happy to help you. We'll be doing more of these whiteboards and hangouts so that we make sure we get all of your questions answered so you feel confident as you apply for your student loans. So that's all for me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for tuning in.